They didn't tell me I was the good one. Not in words. They said it in chores, in silence, in expectation. When I was 12, my dad forgot to pick me up from school. Again. So I walked home. 4 miles. Carrying a science project that would later get ruined by the rain. When I arrived, soaked and shivering, my mom said, "Why didn't you remind your father?" I apologized and cleaned up the puddle I left behind. That's what being the good one felt like. Not praise, not pride, but a quiet contract you don't remember signing. In high school, I got a part-time job. Not because I needed money, because I hated asking for it. Every dollar I earned went toward groceries, textbooks, bills that somehow became mine. My parents called me mature for my age. What they meant was, "You suffer quietly. You don't make us feel bad." My brother, Lucas, dropped out of college in his second semester. They threw him a welcome home dinner. When I graduated with honors, they said, "Well, that's what we expected." I didn't ask for much. I didn't want to be thanked, just seen. But even that felt like too much. I moved back home after college. Not because I failed, I got a job offer immediately. But they asked me to help until things got stable. I paid the electric bill, the internet, sometimes the rent. They never said thank you, just handed me envelopes and said, "You've always been the responsible one." Lucas bought a new gaming console. They celebrated, said he deserved it, he's had a rough year. I bought new shoes for work. Mom asked, "Did you really need those?" That was the rhythm. Give quietly, ask for nothing, be dependable, so they can be indulgent. I told myself it was normal. Family means sacrifice. You give until you're empty, and then you give some more. But deep down, something didn't feel like love. It felt like leverage. When the refrigerator broke, I used my savings to buy a new one. They let me pick the color, silver, not white. My mom told people it was her choice. When the landlord raised the rent, I covered the difference. My dad told Lucas not to worry about it. Slowly, the house became mine. The debt mine. The groceries mine. The blame, always mine. One night, I came home from work late, exhausted, burned out. I dropped my bag on the table and asked quietly if someone else could handle dinner. My mom looked at me like I'd slapped her. "You don't have to act like a guest in this house, Madison. We all do our part." I looked around. The dishes I washed, the bills I paid, the meals I planned, the receipts that had my name on them, but never my story. And in that moment, I realized I was doing everything but being treated like nothing. They called me the good one, but what they meant was, "You're the easiest to take from." I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I just made a decision. Not to leave. Not yet. Just to start noticing. Noticing how many conversations I wasn't included in. How many things were assumed. How often I was blamed for not doing enough while carrying more than anyone else. I wrote it all down. Not to shame them. To remind myself that I wasn't imagining it. That being the good one had a cost. And I'd been paying it for years. The final moment that chapter ended was quiet. Like all betrayals are when you're already numb. Lucas got a new car, financed by a friend of Dad's. My mom called it a family win, said she was proud of him. I walked past the living room, carrying a bag of groceries with my own money. And my dad said to Lucas, "Your sister? She's dependable, sure, but you've got potential." I didn't stop walking, but I heard every word, and I felt something inside me stop trying. I had been good for so long I forgot to ask good for who. They called me the good one because I never said no, but good doesn't mean loved, and silence doesn't mean peace. They never praised me outright. Not really. Not without a catch. When I fixed a leak under the sink, Dad said, "You're not bad with your hands, maybe if you'd learned from me earlier." When I got promoted at work, Mom said, "Just don't forget where you came from." It wasn't that they didn't see my accomplishments. They just didn't know how to separate them from their own insecurity. So every compliment came wrapped in warning. Don't outshine. Don't get arrogant. Don't expect anything back. And I learned that love in our house was transactional. Do enough, get noticed, but never thanked. I started noticing the pattern the same way you notice a bruise you can't remember earning. Lucas forgot Mom's birthday. She laughed it off, said boys were forgetful. I showed up with flowers and a gift. She said, "Why would you waste your money on this?" When I stayed home to help clean before a cousin's wedding, she said, "Of course you did. You don't have much of a social life anyway. It was always like that." I didn't mind being helpful. I minded being erased. Lucas crashed his car. Again, Dad said, "We've all made mistakes." I got a parking ticket once and it turned into a lecture about irresponsibility. I started keeping score. Not to get even, to stay sane. Because when you're raised on inconsistent love, you start questioning if your memory is broken or your heart is. There was a night I came home late from work. I'd stayed to help a colleague meet a deadline. I was tired, quiet, hungry. Mom took one look at me and said, "You always look like the world is against you. Maybe try smiling more." Lucas, sitting on the couch, chimed in, "Maybe she's finally realizing she's not special." They laughed. I didn't. I went to my room, closed the door, and stared at the ceiling. I used to cry, but lately, I just feel numb. Praise with conditions doesn't feel like praise at all. It feels like currency you can only spend once before it's turned back into debt. One Saturday, I cleaned the whole house, scrubbed floors, reorganized the pantry, fixed the squeaky door. Mom came home, looked around, and said, "You could have put the rug back where it belongs." No thank you. No recognition. Just a subtle reminder that I was never quite enough. Lucas, meanwhile, forgot to pick up groceries. Dad went instead. Didn't mention it. When I brought it up, he said, "He's got a lot on his plate," as if I didn't. I started eating meals in my room. Not out of spite. Just peace. The table didn't feel like a table anymore. It felt like a stage I wasn't allowed to leave. One evening, Mom cornered me, asked why I was being distant. "You used to be so kind. Now you're just closed off." I wanted to scream, wanted to list every moment they made kindness feel like servitude. Instead, I said, "I'm tired." She nodded, but I could tell she thought it was attitude. That weekend, I got invited to speak at a women's leadership panel. I was nervous, excited, proud. I told them over dinner. Lucas said, "You leading? Isn't that a stretch?" Dad laughed. Mom shrugged and said, "Don't let it get to your head." I nodded, finished my plate, and swallowed the lump in my throat along with the mashed potatoes. Because here's the truth. When they say they love you, but only when you're convenient, you learn to love yourself like a stranger. Carefully, quietly, without expectation. I spoke at the panel, wore a black blazer and red lipstick. The room clapped. I answered questions. I even made a few people cry. Afterward, someone said, "You must come from a powerful family." I smiled. They taught me to be useful. The rest I learned myself. I didn't text them about the panel. Didn't post the photos. Didn't mention it over dinner. Because praise with conditions isn't worth chasing. And if they were never going to be proud of me unless I stayed small, then maybe they never really saw me at all. They praised me as long as I didn't grow past the space they had reserved for me. But shrinking isn't a love language, it's a survival skill. And I'm done surviving. They asked me to cover rent because we were a little tight this month. I said yes. They asked me to add the electricity bill to my auto pay. I said yes. They asked me to pick up groceries, then forgot to pay me back. I said nothing. That's how it started. Quiet asks, mumbled explanations. A debt that grew slowly enough to feel normal. Until one day, the house wasn't ours. It was mine. On paper, no. On paper, I was helping out. But emotionally, physically, financially, the whole house was balanced on my back. And still, they acted like I owed them rent for existing. I started noticing how loud the silence was after I did something for them. No thank you. No appreciation. Just expectation. The first time I bought toilet paper without being asked, Mom texted, "Make sure you get the kind Lucas likes." Not thank you. Not you didn't have to. Just instructions. As if I were the live and help with a debit card and no complaints. Lucas never paid a dime, but he had opinions. "Why don't you buy almond milk anymore? You forgot to grab my protein bars. The Wi-Fi's slow, can you call the provider?" I kept waiting for someone to acknowledge how much I was doing, how much I was carrying. But no one asked. No one looked. They just kept piling it on and calling it being part of the family. One night, I came home from work, late, drained. Lucas was on the couch, ordering takeout. Dad was watching a game. Mom was painting her nails. And I saw the notice on the table, overdue gas bill. I picked it up, heart sinking. Not because I couldn't pay it, because no one had told me. They just assumed I'd take care of it. So I did. Logged in, paid it, and then sat in the dark kitchen, feeling smaller than I had in years. I lived there, slept there, paid for nearly everything inside those walls, but I didn't belong there. Not really. When something needed fixing, they came to me. When they wanted advice, they skipped me. They invited Lucas to a weekend trip with extended family. I found out from his Instagram story. I brought it up later. Mom said, "We didn't think you'd be interested. You're always so busy." What she meant was, "We didn't think about you." Being forgotten hurts. Being useful, but invisible, it erases you in pieces. I started keeping receipts, just for myself, just to remind me that this wasn't in my head. March, groceries $314 April, power bill $126 May, new showerhead Lucas broke the old one $58 June, birthday cake for dad $42 July. Nothing. July was when I started pulling back. They didn't notice. I skipped buying groceries. They texted me angry emoji faces. I didn't refill the printer ink. Mom yelled when it ran out during her work from home meeting. I told them I couldn't cover the internet for a month. Dad said, "Well, then maybe it is time you start paying rent properly or find your own place." That's when it hit me. I'd been paying rent this whole time. Just not with a lease, with my soul. I tried talking to Mom. Really talking. I sat her down, told her I felt used, ignored, invisible. She looked at me like I'd grown horns. "Madison, you're being dramatic. You help because you want to, remember? No one's forcing you. But when you're raised to believe that love is something you earn, saying no feels like betrayal, even when you're drowning." I asked her, "Would you still love me if I stopped helping?" She didn't answer, just stood up, grabbed her coffee and said, "This is what stress does to people. You're clearly overwhelmed." Overwhelmed? Yes, but not by work, by them. The worst part? They still called me family, still used words like us, as if we were a team. But family doesn't ignore your burnout, doesn't call you ungrateful when you finally speak up. I started sleeping with my door locked, not out of fear, out of self-preservation. I made a list, not a financial one this time, an emotional tally, things they never asked me. "Are you okay? Do you want to rest? How are you really doing? Do you feel loved here?" They asked for everything except my feelings. And when I finally stopped giving, they accused me of being distant. I wasn't distant. I was just done. I lived in a house I paid for, but never once felt like I had a room of my own. Because no matter how much I gave, I was never seen, only used. I didn't plan to explode. I planned to talk, calmly, gently, like an adult holding a conversation with the people who raised her. But pain doesn't follow scripts, and neither does betrayal. It started with dinner. Mom made her usual baked pasta. Dad was half watching the news. Lucas was on his phone, barely pretending to be present. I'd waited until the meal was over, the dishes cleared, the table wiped, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge. "Can we talk?" I asked. 3 heads looked up, briefly, like they expected me to announce a new grocery item they'd forgotten. I sat down, hands folded. I'd even rehearsed the first line. "I've been feeling overwhelmed, and I need to talk about how things have been lately." Dad rolled his eyes. Mom's face tightened. Not angry, annoyed. Lucas didn't look up from his phone. "Overwhelmed?" Mom repeated, as if the word were foreign. "I've been handling most of the bills," I continued. "Groceries, utilities, repairs. And I don't feel appreciated. I don't feel like this is sustainable anymore." Dad scoffed. "You want a medal?" I blinked. "No, I want support. Or at least acknowledgement." Lucas finally looked up. Smirked. "Sounds like someone's having a martyr complex." Something cracked. Not loudly, just a hairline fracture in the place where Grace used to live. "I'm not asking for a trophy. I'm asking to not be treated like an ATM that cooks and cleans." Mom's voice sharpened. "We never asked you to do anything. You chose this." I stared at her. "You asked, over and over. You just never called it asking." Dad leaned back. "You're being dramatic. You always were, always." That word. So small, so cruel. "I've been doing everything I can to hold this family together, and you've made me feel like a burden for even needing to breathe." Lucas laughed. "Wow, you're really spiraling." Mom stood up. "You don't like it here? Then leave. No one's forcing you to stay." I froze. "What?" "You heard me. Pack your things. Maybe some space will help you figure out how good you had it." Dad added, You've clearly outgrown this family. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was a funeral for the version of me that still believed they might love me unconditionally. My hands shook, not from fear, from recognition. This wasn't new. This was the moment every moment before had been preparing me for. Fine, I said, calm, cold. Done. I'll go. But don't forget you told me to. You pushed me out, and I won't be crawling back. Lucas muttered something under his breath. I didn't ask him to repeat it. Some ghosts aren't worth resurrecting. I packed that night. Not all of it. Just the essentials. Clothes, documents, dignity. Emma, my friend from work, answered on the second ring. Of course you can stay. Take the guest room. Take your time. I left a note. Short, not bitter. You made your choice. I'm finally making mine. I walked out just past midnight. The house was quiet. For once, no one followed me. Not even Mom. I got into my car, started the engine, sat there for a second with my hands on the wheel and my heart in my throat. Then I drove. Not fast, not frantically, just forward. Emma's apartment was small, but warm, safe. I slept on clean sheets and woke up without the weight of obligation pinning me to the mattress. The next morning, Mom texted, "Hope you feel better now." No, come home. No, I'm sorry. Just that. As if my pain was a tantrum I needed to get out of my system. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of survival. Because once someone shows you how easy it is for them to let you go, you learn to stop trying to stay. They told me to leave and expected me to come back when I was quieter. So I left. And this time, I brought my voice with me. Emma's apartment smelled like citrus and coffee. Not because she tried to impress me. That was just her. A soft kind of light. The kind that doesn't ask to be noticed, but still warms everything around it. She handed me a spare key and a folded blanket. No questions. No lectures. Just stay as long as you need. And for the first time in years, I heard words that didn't feel like weapons. The silence in her apartment was different from home. At home, silence was sharp, waiting for someone to explode, or sigh too loud, or leave the toilet seat up just to be noticed. Here, it was soft, gentle, like a song you didn't realize you missed until it started playing again. I slept through the night, woke up disoriented, then relieved. No one was yelling. No one was asking me where the almond milk was. No passive-aggressive texts. Just me. And peace. I made toast. Burned it. Laughed. Small things became sacred. A moment to myself. The right to mess up without consequence. But grief doesn't vanish. It mutates. The next day, I went grocery shopping. I stood in the pasta aisle, staring at brands I'd never tried before. I reached for the cheap kind, the one I always bought at home. Then stopped, looked at my hand, then the cart, then the tile beneath my feet. And I cried, quietly, absurdly, because it hit me I never bought things I liked, only what they wanted, what they approved. I didn't know my favorite kind of pasta. That realization hit harder than the night they kicked me out. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a question you can't answer in the middle of a supermarket. That night, Emma found me on the couch, holding a half-eaten protein bar I didn't remember opening. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me and handed me a tissue. I told her everything, not all at once, just pieces. How being the good one felt like being the ghost that paid the bills. How love had always come with conditions. How leaving felt like dying and being reborn at the same time. She listened, really listened. No interruptions, no corrections. And when I finished, she said, "They lost the best thing they ever had. You didn't leave. You freed yourself." I started making new habits. Slowly. I bought flowers for myself. Tulips. Mom used to say they were impractical. I bought them anyway. Put them on the table, just to prove I could. I made a budget just mine. No hidden debts. No money disappearing into someone else's comfort. I cooked meals without anyone hovering over my shoulders suggesting how I could do it better. And every night, I wrote something in a notebook titled, "What I Don't Owe Anyone." First entry. I don't owe them silence. I don't owe them my bank account. I don't owe them forgiveness on their timeline. Lucas texted once. Just a link to an unpaid bill for the house. No words. No hey. No explanation. I blocked the number, not in anger, in clarity. 2 weeks later, Mom left a voicemail. "We're struggling. This isn't the time for pride, Madison." I deleted it, because finally, I understood they weren't calling me back out of love. They were calling out of need. I was useful, not loved. And now that I was gone, they were learning the difference. Emma found a second job, asked if I wanted to split groceries. I said yes. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Choice tasted better than obligation. On Sunday morning, we painted our nails while watching trashy reality TV. I laughed so hard I spilled polish on the rug. Emma grinned. Finally, she said, "You're coming back to life." She was right. Grief still visited, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in waves, but it no longer anchored me. I could float, breathe, build, and I was learning. You can mourn people and still walk away from them. You can love the memory and leave the harm. Grief isn't always a sob in a dark room. Sometimes, it is standing in a grocery aisle realizing you don't even know what kind of life you'd choose for yourself because you've never been given the chance to choose. It came on a Tuesday, 4:11 p.m., gray sky, laundry still damp on the drying rack. My phone buzzed an unknown number, but I knew, some things don't need names to feel familiar. I let it ring twice, then picked up. Madison, Dad's voice, lower than usual, less bark, more gravel. I stayed quiet. He filled the silence. They always do. "Listen, I know things got out of hand." He didn't say sorry, just circled it like a shark. "Your mother misses you. Lucas too. The house is quiet without you." That was rich. They told me to leave, told me to grow up, to stop being dramatic, to get out if you can't handle being part of a family. Now the silence was a problem. Still, I didn't interrupt. I let him keep digging. Then he got to it. "The reason for the call. We're behind on the mortgage. Some of the bills too. Things have been tight." I felt something cold settle between my ribs. Not shock, not sadness. Recognition. "We thought maybe you could help. Just this month. A small loan. $6,000. $6,000. Like it was nothing. Like I hadn't bled out my 20s in grocery aisles and quiet breakdowns just to keep their lights on. I didn't answer, so he tried again. "I mean, you've always been the one we could count on." And there it was. The hook, wrapped in nostalgia, baited with guilt. "We raised you, Madison. We're still your parents." Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not violently. Just a clean, quiet break from the version of me that still needed their approval. I said, "You didn't raise me. You used me." "There's a difference." He was silent for a moment. Then, "You really think we don't care?" I let out a breath, not a sigh, a release. "You cared when I was useful. You loved me like a bank loves a borrower." He tried to speak. I didn't let him. "When I asked for help, you told me I was dramatic. When I expressed boundaries, you said I was selfish. Now you're asking for money and dressing it up as family." I could hear his breathing, ragged, furious. "This isn't about money," he said. "It's about respect, about responsibility." I almost laughed. Respect doesn't look like exile. Responsibility isn't one-sided. He started to raise his voice, the familiar edge returning. But I stayed calm. "Because you don't have to shout when you're no longer afraid of being unheard. I'm not your safety net anymore," I said. "You cut the cord. Now you're falling. And it's not my job to catch you." He hung up. No goodbye. No thanks. Just click. Dead air. I stood there for a moment, phone still pressed to my ear, and felt light. Not happy, but free. They always said I was cold, but I was never cold. I was tired. They said I was ungrateful, but I was never ungrateful. I was drained. And now, I was done. I texted Emma. They called, asked for money. She replied, "Did you give it to them?" I wrote, "I gave them something better. Closure." That night, I bought myself dinner, splurged on dessert. No shame. Tipped well. Walked home slowly. Looked up at the streetlights like they were cheering me on. I used to think boundaries meant burning bridges. Now I know. Boundaries are locks on doors that lead back into fire. And I wasn't walking into that house again. Not literally. Not emotionally. I owed them nothing. And that was the first time it felt true in my bones. They called it love, but it sounded like debt. And I finally realized my silence was the interest I'd been paying all these years. 2 days passed. No follow-up texts. No guilt trap voicemails. Just silence. And that, somehow, was louder than any of the shouting they used to do. I knew what they were waiting for. They thought I'd crack, that I'd call back, that I'd apologize for setting a boundary I never should have had to explain. But I didn't. Not this time. Instead, I went for a walk. No destination. Just forward. The air smelled like rain. Like the kind of storm that doesn't destroy, just clears the air. I passed a bookstore. A used one. All creaky wood floors and mismatched lamps. Went inside. Bought a memoir about healing. Underlined a line that said, "You are not selfish for choosing yourself." I wrote that quote on a sticky note and put it on Emma's fridge, next to another one that said, "You can grieve and still say no." I made tea, cleaned my inbox, answered overdue texts. Real life was happening without the weight of their need chaining me to the past. But on the third day, Lucas called. Different number, new tactic. I answered, not to reconcile, to finish the story. His voice was flat. No hello, just, "So you're really just going to walk away from your family?" I didn't respond right away. He kept going. "Mom's crying every night. Dad's a mess. We need you, Madison. I need you." I almost believed him. Almost. Until he added, "But hey, if you're too busy being a victim, I guess we'll figure it out without you." There it was. The mask slipping. Again. I said, "I'm not walking away from family. I'm walking away from people who used me and called it love." He exhaled sharply. "God, you're so full of yourself." I smiled. "No, I'm finally full of something that isn't guilt." He tried again. "They're your parents." I let that sit, then replied, "That's a fact, not an excuse. They made mistakes. They made choices. They need help. Then they should call a therapist, not me." "You're heartless." "No, I just grew a spine." He hung up. No goodbye, no tears, just silence. And for once, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. I sat on the floor and let myself cry. Not because I missed them, because I had spent so long being afraid to say no, and now I had. And the sky didn't fall. The next day, I opened a blank document and wrote the words, "No" as a full sentence. Then below it, "And I don't need to explain myself to people who only listen when I am in pain." I started a support group online. Anonymous. Safe. Called it Quiet Daughters. The ones who hold the house together with bandaged hands and swallowed words. The ones who never got to say no without consequence. We shared stories, pain, progress, and in their voices, I heard my own echoing back. It healed something I didn't know was still bleeding. Weeks passed. I started sleeping better, eating slower, laughing louder. I bought a bike, rode it to the waterfront, wrote in a journal that didn't ask me to justify why I needed space. I kept a sticky note, the one that said, "You are not selfish for choosing yourself." I added a new one. "They're allowed to ask. You're allowed to say no." They did ask again. A few weeks later, Mom emailed a long message about memories, tradition, what family means. And at the bottom, "Can we talk? Can we fix this?" I stared at it, read it twice, then clicked archive. Not because I was angry, because I had nothing left to explain. I didn't respond, and that silence was the loudest thing I'd ever said. They said I was cold when I stopped saying yes, but truth is no was the warmest thing I'd ever given myself. 6 months. That is how long it has been since I packed my bag and left a house that never felt like home. Some days it feels like yesterday. Some days it feels like a life someone else lived and finally escaped from. I wake up to sunlight now. No shouting. No guilt in the hallway. No asking myself what version of me will be easiest to tolerate today. Just warmth. Stillness. Me. I have my own apartment. Tiny. Barely enough room for the books I keep collecting. But it's mine. The dishes in the sink? Mine. The music playing from the kitchen? Mine. The half-burned candle on the windowsill? Mine too. And that matters more than I ever thought it would. I got a promotion last month. My boss said, "You show up with presence. You lead without demanding. People trust you." Funny. The traits they dismissed at home became the reason I'm thriving now. I adopted a plant. A stubborn, half-scorched pothos named Elliot. We're both recovering from root rot. I go on long walks with no destination. Sometimes I end up at the same used bookstore where I first underlined that line, "You are not selfish for choosing yourself." They know me by name now. Sometimes they set books aside they think I'll love. I read poetry again, out loud, in my living room, to no one, to myself. Sometimes I cry, not out of sadness, out of recognition. Because I am finally getting to know the version of me that didn't survive on obligation. The version that dreams, laughs, takes up space. I write in a journal every morning. 10 minutes. Stream of consciousness. Some days I write, I'm proud of you. Other days I write, I miss the idea of them, but not the reality. Both are true. And that's okay. They haven't called in months. No emails. No voicemails. I thought that would hurt. It doesn't. Not anymore. Silence used to be punishment. Now it's peace. Someone once asked me, do you think you'll ever forgive them? And I said, I already did. But that doesn't mean they get access again. Healing isn't about returning to what broke you and proving you're okay. It is about honoring the version of you who didn't make it out whole and choosing not to go back just because the door is still open. Emma still texts every day, sometimes with jokes, sometimes with links to furniture she thinks would look great in your warm little sanctuary. We're planning a trip in the spring, somewhere with ocean air and no reception. I can't wait. Last week, I hosted 3 friends for dinner. We cooked barefoot, spilled sauce, talked about EXCs and weird dreams and the songs that raised us. And halfway through dessert, I realized this is what family can feel like. Safe, soft, chosen. Someone passed me a plate of cookies and said, I am so glad you're right here. No reason, no follow-up ask, just presence, just love. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, not to cry, just to feel it, fully. Because this life, I built it, brick by brick, boundary by boundary. No blueprint but instinct. And the girl they told to leave? The girl they said would come crawling back? She never left. She transformed. She peeled off the labels, outgrew the roles, stopped apologizing for not shrinking. She didn't burn the house down. She walked out quietly and locked the door behind her. And in the stillness that followed, she learned something radical. She didn't have to earn a life she was always worthy of. They told me I'd regret walking away. But all I feel now is peace. Because I didn't lose a family, I found myself.